Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Monday, November 17th, 2025. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today, the U.S. bombs Somalia, civilians reported killed. So the U.S. has launched at least 5 more airstrikes in Somalia in recent days as the Trump administration continues to bomb the country at a record pace. And I know I'm always going on about this, the lack of media coverage, but the fact is the last time I spoke to you on this show was a couple days ago. In that time, since then, AFRICOM, U.S. Africa Command, announced 5 more airstrikes in Somalia. And do you know how much media coverage it has gotten in the U.S.? None. As far as I can tell, I didn't do an exhaustive search, but there's nothing. And this is the way it's been for months now. Just no coverage of this U.S. bombing campaign, which is unprecedented for Somalia. And I think that says a lot about us as a country, that our government could be waging a war like this in another country, and just nobody's even aware of it. The media, it's not even worth like a 2-paragraph little short story in AP or something, just nothing. So according to press releases from U.S. Africa Command, the U.S. launched airstrikes targeting al-Shabaab in southern Somalia on November 11th, November 13th, November 14th, and November 15th. Unverified reports on social media suggest that another U.S. airstrike was launched in the area on Sunday, November 16th. So I didn't count that one because that's not verified yet. So there's 4 there in southern Somalia, and the command also announced 1 strike on November 10th against the ISIS affiliate in Puntland. So a total of 5 strikes to add to our total. That brings the total number of U.S. airstrikes in Somalia this year to 95. And again, this is unprecedented. The previous record for most U.S. airstrikes in Somalia in a single year was 63, which Trump set back in 2019. So all of these airstrikes that the U.S. said targeted al-Shabaab were launched to the northeast of the port city of Kismayo, and this is in Jubaland in the southernmost region of Somalia. According to al-Shabaab's news agency, Shahada News Agency, so this is essentially al-Shabaab's propaganda arm, but they reported that a U.S. and Somali government attack on the town of Jemaim on Saturday killed 12 civilians, including 8 children, 3 women, and an elderly man. And they published photos of children who were killed, who were allegedly killed in this attack and injured as well. And this is one of the kids who was injured. And this report said that the attack involved airstrikes and artillery strikes on a civilian area. It was also reported by Bay Doa Online, which is a Somali media outlet, which, as far as I can tell, is not pro-al-Shabaab at all, but they also reported something similar. They said a suspected U.S. airstrike in Jemaim killed 10 people, including 8 children. So the number is a little lower. The al-Shabaab said 12 were killed. This media outlet says 10, but they're also reporting that 8 children were killed. And this is from by Doa. They said, quote, "Witnesses say homes and businesses were destroyed during the strikes. The U.S. military usually targets suspected al-Shabaab positions in the region, but previous operations have occasionally resulted in civilian casualties," end quote. And other posts on social media suggest that the strike may have occurred on Sunday, not Saturday, as reported by al-Shabaab's news agency. So AFRICOM offered no details about its airstrike on Saturday, but based on what they said it was 55 kilometers to the northeast of Kismayo. That puts it in the same area as this town where these civilian casualties were reported. AFRICOM, they stopped sharing estimates of casualties or assessments on civilian harm. They haven't been including those in their press releases since April of this year. So I asked AFRICOM about these claims of civilian casualties, and we'll see if they get back to me about that. The command has been known to undercount civilian casualties in its airstrikes in Somalia. So other reports here from Somalia, from the Somalian National News Agency, they reported that the Somali National Army and the U.S.-trained Danab Commandos, which is a special military unit of the Somali military that's trained and armed by the U.S. They conducted operations against al-Shabaab in this area, Jemaim, claiming that heavy losses were inflicted on the group. The report made no mention of civilian casualties. And then you had Haran Online, which is another Somali news site, citing Somali security officials who claim that 56 al-Shabaab fighters were killed and 20 were captured in the operations in this area. And so these are pro-government outlets, basically pro-government sources. So keep that in mind. So there's a reason why it's really difficult to, well, there's a few reasons why it's really difficult to really know what the situation on the ground is where the U.S. is launching these airstrikes in Somalia. Number one is that in the al-Shabaab controlled areas, they restrict the use of internet and mobile phones. So the information that comes out of there can be very controlled. I think depending on the area, they control a lot of territory in Somalia. But again, it's very controlled information that comes out of there. And then you also have the fact that the government, they arrest, they have a history of arresting or restricting in some way journalists who report critically on the security forces or report critically on the war, or sometimes just report on it at all. I know one case there was an al-Shabaab attack and a journalist reported on it, and they didn't want him to for some reason. They put out the real number of casualties, which they wanted to conceal, and they arrested him. And, you know, this is the U.S.-backed government. They certainly do not respect press freedom. So you have those restrictions, both from the government and al-Shabaab. And then you also have the fact that nobody in American media cares about it. So there's no like oversight for AFRICOM. So they don't have a reason to care. I mean, they're not going to, Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com heard that there was some civilian casualties. We're going to we'll get right on it, Dave. That's not what they're going to tell me. They're going to give me some non-answer probably. And I know human rights organizations in recent, going back a few years, maybe Amnesty International and those groups, would get on the scene of a U.S. airstrike, but it doesn't seem like they're paying any attention to Somalia either. So there's just, we're really flailing in the dark here when it comes to trying to figure out what is happening on the ground in this war. But I'll certainly follow up on this story and these civilian casualties and see what we can figure out. But I mean, these are major airstrikes during what seem like very big battles that the U.S. is involved in. And I think we should at least be aware of it. Maybe have a debate, a conversation about this war that the U.S. has been fighting. And I mean, the thing is, too, I know if you guys know Brad Pierce, he has a Substack called The Wayward Rabbler. And he writes a lot about Africa. He knows a lot about Africa. And like he says, these airstrikes aren't going to do anything. This isn't going to win the war. They're just going to gain some territory against al-Shabaab. They'll probably lose it sometime in the future, maybe try to gain it again. But this is something that the U.S. has been fighting specifically against al-Shabaab since 2007, and it just hasn't gotten anywhere. All right, so the next one here, Trump says that we may be in talks with Maduro. So President Trump said on Sunday that the U.S. may be having discussions with Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, suggesting his administration has not entirely cut off diplomacy with Caracas, as previous reports have said. So Trump made the comments when asked about Secretary of State Marco Rubio's announcement that the State Department would be designating the so-called Cartel de los Soles, or Cartel of the Suns, as a foreign terrorist organization. A big problem with this is that the group does not actually exist. There is no group of people who calls themselves the Cartel of the Suns. What's interesting, and I have to thank Max Blumenthal for this knowledge here. Well, I knew that it went back to the 1990s, before Chavez was even in power. The term was first used. There was a scandal with two Venezuelan generals who were accused of drug trafficking, and generals in the Venezuelan military have sun insignias on their uniforms, so therefore they called them the Cartel of the Suns. And Max posted on X, one of these generals, according to a 60 Minutes report from 1993, where they spoke with DEA officials, and one of these generals worked with the CIA, and they actually spoke to him, and he worked and cooperated with the CIA. CIA helped him smuggle cocaine into the United States. And now, over 20 years later, they're using the Cartel of the Suns to justify potential war. And today, the term is used. You see it used by like the think tanks and stuff that investigate crime in Latin America. But it's used to describe an alleged network of Venezuelan military officials involved in drug trafficking, who's essentially the accusation against them is that they let people move drugs through certain territories and they don't arrest certain people. And, they get kickbacks for that. And the real allegation of Maduro is that against Maduro is that he essentially allows this to happen to keep his, people happy. But there's the idea that he's like a cartel leader, that he's calling shots and directing drug shipments. I mean, it's just not true. It's just, there's no evidence for that. And of course he denies that all the allegations, and his government has, done a lot of anti-drug trafficking stuff as well. So it's clear that they're just trying to cook up a reason for a war here. But anyway, so the State Department's going to designate them a foreign terrorist organization. The Treasury Department has already declared them a specially designated terrorist group. I think that's the official legal term. So Trump was asked, does this designation mean that you can take action, that you can target Maduro's assets or infrastructure inside Venezuela? And Trump claimed that it allows him to do that, even though it would be illegal without congressional authorization. But this is what he said. He said, quote, "It allows us to do that, but I haven't said we're going to do that, and we may be having some discussions with Maduro, and we'll see how that turns out, but they would like to talk," end quote. So he says that they may be having discussions with Maduro, and Maduro has made very clear that he's willing to work with the U.S., that he wants dialogue. He sent a letter to Trump after they started bombing the boats, basically saying, we can resolve anything through diplomacy, saying that he's ready to talk to Rick Grenell at any time. And Grenell is a special envoy for Trump who did go and meet with Maduro back in January. So, if you remember back in October, the report said that Trump cut off all diplomacy with Venezuela. Now there's some signs that the talks have restarted. But we still see the military buildup, the aircraft carriers, these reports that Trump's getting briefed on options to bomb Venezuela. And, I can't help but think about when Trump said that he was committed to a diplomatic solution with Iran, and then a few hours later, Israeli planes were bombing Iran. So you got to keep that in mind. This is who we're dealing with here. But hopefully, there's some kind of diplomatic solution, though I don't know what the U.S. is going to accept. Anyway, so the next one here, the U.S. bombs boat in Latin America and continues military buildup. So the U.S. military has bombed another alleged drug boat in the waters of Latin America as it continues its military buildup in the region and pushes toward a potential war with Venezuela. According to U.S. Southern Command, the strike targeted a vessel in the Eastern Pacific Ocean. They claim that it killed 3 narco-terrorists, which is the term they use to justify these extrajudicial executions, these murders on the high seas. And, of course, no evidence here to back up the claims about what was on the boat. And so this is the 21st strike against a boat in the region. They've blown up a total of 22 boats. In one of them, the video showed 2 boats were tied up to each other, and it blew up the 2 of them. So 22 boats blown up, including 11 in the Caribbean and 11 in the Pacific. And at least 82 people have been killed, according to numbers from the Trump administration. And, of course, we still see the military buildup. The USS Gerald Ford is in the Caribbean now. So, yeah, it's continuing this whole thing. What Hegseth is now calling Operation Southern Spear. All right, so the next one here, the IDF killed 266 people in Gaza since the ceasefire, and the ceasefire is in quotes there, but just some of the latest numbers from Gaza. The Israeli military has killed 266 Palestinians and wounded 635. Since the U.S.-backed ceasefire deal went into effect on October 10th, Gaza's health ministry said on Sunday. And like I've said before, it's not a true ceasefire because Israel has not ceased firing. It's more like a de-escalation deal. And the health ministry said that over the previous 72-hour period, at least 2 Palestinians were killed by Israeli forces. And then there was a report from Wafa that on Sunday, At least one Palestinian was killed by an Israeli airstrike targeting a group of civilians to the east of Gaza City. And a source at Nasser Hospital in southern Gaza told Al Jazeera that 3 Palestinians were killed by Israeli airstrikes east of Khan Yunis. So 4 reported killed just on Sunday. And this, it sounds like based on those locations, this is near the yellow line. And we've been talking about that a lot, how Israel's just been, firing on whoever either crosses the line or gets close to it, or, it seems pretty arbitrary. And they don't have any respect for Palestinian lives. So, they don't feel the need to do anything differently. Just blast them, blow them away. And so let's see here, just some numbers. So since the truce deal went into effect, the bodies of 548 deceased Palestinians have been recovered from the rubble, and Israel has handed over the remains of 330 Palestinians in exchange for the bodies of Israeli captives released by Hamas. And around 10,000 Palestinians are still missing in Gaza and presumed dead under the rubble. So the health ministry's latest death toll since October 7, 2023 is 69,483. And the number of wounded is 170,706. So what is that? About 240,000 total casualties. That's killed and injured. And studies have found that the ministry's numbers are likely a significant undercount and could be by as much as 40%, which means, if that is true, then the real violent death toll could be close to or over 100,000. That's just people killed by military action, directly by military action. So these are huge numbers we're talking about here in such a small place like Gaza. All right, so the next one here, Trump considers skipping disarmament phase of Gaza plan. So this article is from The Cradle. So the U.S. is looking to forego the stage of the Gaza ceasefire initiative, which involves deploying an international security force to the strip to disarm Hamas and other Palestinian resistance factions, Israeli media reported over the weekend. So kind of a strange report here from Israeli media, because on Monday, the UN Security Council is supposed to be voting on the U.S. resolution at the UN to deploy this international security force. One thing that the U.S. Changed about it, they included some vague language about like a path toward a Palestinian state to make the Arab states happy. Apparently, Israel is very against that. They're pressuring them to water down that language, so we'll see what happens. But now these Israeli reports are saying that the U.S. is saying, let's not even bother disarming Hamas. Let's start the reconstruction and then try to figure it out. Not clear from these reports if that means let's start the construction in one half, which, the Israeli occupied half, because we've seen U.S. officials say that they're considering that. So that might just be the plan, is to just start that reconstruction and just leave the rest of Gaza in ruins as a way to try to pressure Hamas. But essentially, this plan has turned into this idea that this international force would go in and like disarm Hamas and maybe fight Hamas for Israel, and none of the countries, that are potentially willing to be part of this force want to sign up for fighting Hamas on behalf of Israel. So we'll see, what happens Monday with the UN resolution. All right, so the next one here, activists allege that Israel used an NGO to traffic Palestinians from Gaza. So this article is from Middle East Eye. So this is a strange story. A plane carrying 153 Palestinians arrived in South Africa. I think this was over the weekend. But apparently the country wasn't ready for them, didn't let them disembark the plane for 12 hours. A lot of the Palestinians on the plane didn't know where they were going. And apparently it was some NGO called Al-Majd Europe that claims to be able to help Palestinians in Gaza get to safety, get somewhere where they'll, be safe and receive help. But apparently this group, and there's a report in Haaretz about this as well, has ties to Israel, that they've been recommended by Israel for the Israeli government, I think Kogat, the occupation body, to deal with when it comes to getting Palestinians out of Gaza. So this is raising suspicion here that was kind of the purpose of this flight, and maybe some of these other flights, is to just to get Palestinians out of Gaza to facilitate Israel's, ultimate goal of ethnic cleansing. Though obviously you would need a lot of planes carrying 153 people to do that. But the whole thing is just kind of a strange, certainly raises eyebrows. All right, so the next one here, 21 House Democrats introduce bill recognizing Gaza genocide. So this one is from Brett Wilkins. So on Friday, Rashida Tlaib and 20 of her Democratic colleagues introduced legislation that would officially recognize Israel's 25-month war on Gaza as a genocide, a move that came as Israeli forces continued killing Palestinians and violating a ceasefire with Hamas. So this, if this bill was passed, obviously it's not going to pass, but it would officially recognize the state that the state of Israel has committed the crime of genocide against the Palestinian people in Gaza, and affirm that it is official U.S. policy to prevent and punish the crime of genocide wherever it occurs. So they have a total of 21 co-sponsors. We'll see if that number goes up. Maybe Marjorie Taylor Greene will get on there. That would be kind of cool. But I should check out the names. I don't think it's listed here in the article. Oh, actually it is. So here are some of the Democrats who have co-sponsored this bill. Becca Balint from Vermont, Andre Carson from Indiana, Greg Cesar from Texas, Maxine Dexter, Oregon, Maxwell Alejandro Frost from Florida, Jesus Choi Garcia from Illinois, Al Green from Texas, Pramila Jayapal from Washington, Hank Johnson Jr. from Georgia, Ro Khanna from California, good to see him on there, Summer Lee from Pennsylvania, Jim McGovern, AOC, Ilhan Omar, Mark Pocan, Ayanna Presley, Delia Ramirez, Latifa Simon, Nydia Velasquez, and Bonnie Watson Coleman. So those are the Democrats who have signed up to officially declare what Israel has done in Gaza is genocide. All right, so the next one here, Israel attacks UNIFIL peacekeepers in Lebanon. So this one is from Jason Ditz. So UNIFIL peacekeepers in southern Lebanon reported on Sunday that the Israeli military attacked their personnel. The incident saw Israeli tank fire on the UNIFIL near one of the military outposts that the IDF has built up in Lebanese territory. No UNIFIL troops were injured, though they had to hunker down in a position for 30 minutes before withdrawing from the area. The IDF claimed that the weather was poor and they mistook the UNIFIL for suspects, although they claimed firing on them was not deliberate. And they claim this all the time. They've been firing on UNIFIL or dropping grenades near them a lot. And they claim it's, oops, we didn't mean to, but they're very, they have bright white vehicles and they have the blue helmets. They're very easy to spot. So this idea that they're firing on them accidentally, I find hard to believe. And we also know that Israel wants them out of there. They want the UN peacekeeping force out of southern Lebanon. All right, so the next one here, violence continues to rage in Syria's Suwayda. So another one from Jason here. So there's been some more fighting in southern Syria's Suwayda province, where we saw the anti-Druze massacres back in July. And now there are you have two sides here. It started with clashes between Bedouin tribes and Druze, and then you had the government fighters come in and they started massacring civilians, and some of those were on camera, including, one I covered for antiwar.com. They executed an American citizen and some of his family members. I mean, just horrific videos. And these guys film it themselves and put it on social media. And again, these are Syrian government, according to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, Syrian Interior Ministry and Defense Ministry personnel who are committing these massacres. But anyway, so the Syrian government is blaming outlaw groups of the Druze for the latest fighting that's been happening. So it's been a few days now that the ceasefire has broken down. They claim that the Druze attacked, and then the Druze, on the other hand, claim that it was the military that started the fighting, say that they repelled an attack and inflicted heavy casualties on the Syrian troops. So we'll see if this fighting it doesn't look like there's numbers of casualties here, but we'll see if the fighting continues. Keep an eye on it. All right, so the next one here, Saudi Crown Prince seeks U.S. defense guarantee. So Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman will meet with President Trump at the White House this Tuesday and is expected to push for the U.S. to provide a security guarantee to Saudi Arabia and for a deal to arm Riyadh with F-35 fighter jets. So the Saudis have long sought a pause they have long sought a defense pact with the U.S., and their renewed interest has been prompted by Trump providing a security guarantee to Qatar after Israel bombed Doha. Qatar became the first Arab country to receive a guarantee from the U.S. that is similar to NATO's Article 5, though it was given through an executive order, which could be ignored by future U.S. presidents. Saudi Arabia is expected to seek a stronger guarantee. So Saudi Arabia and Pakistan recently signed a mutual defense pact that places Saudi Arabia under Pakistan's nuclear umbrella, which to me seemed pretty significant. Analysts suggested in comments to Middle East Eye that the U.S. and Saudi Arabia may reach a deal that puts Saudi Arabia under the U.S. nuclear umbrella and removing it from Pakistan's. I don't really understand I don't know if I really see that happening, but this is what a lot of people are saying, that Saudi Arabia is actually asking to be put under the U.S. nuclear umbrella and potentially have the U.S. deploy nuclear weapons to its territory. President Trump told reporters on Friday that he is considering a deal to sell F-35 fighter jets to Saudi Arabia, though U.S. officials told the AP that it was unlikely over concerns that the sale would upset the U.S. commitment to ensure Israel maintains a qualitative military edge over other countries in the region. Whenever you hear that term, the qualitative military edge, it's usually in reference to this commitment that the U.S. government has to making sure Israel has a better military than its neighbors, than other regional countries. And Israel is currently the only Middle Eastern country to have F-35 fighter jets, and it uses them regularly to bomb its neighbors. So according to a report from Axios, Israeli officials want Trump to condition the sale of F-35 fighter jets to Saudi Arabia on the condition that Riyadh normalizes relations with Israel. Trump is saying he wants the Saudis to join the Abraham Accords. Realistically, I just don't think that's happening, obviously, anytime soon. The Saudis are saying that they need a guarantee for a Palestinian state, and obviously that's not going to happen anytime soon. So as part of its normalization deal with the UAE, Israel agreed that the U.S. could sell F-35 jets to Abu Dhabi, but that sale has been put on hold, and it's not clear if that's ever going to go through. On top of the concerns that Israel would lose its edge in the region, U.S. officials also worry that selling F-35s to Gulf Arab states could lead to China getting a hold of the technology, although I think Israel has a history of giving some of our technology to China. So Saudi Arabia and the UAE, another reason why I would not want to give them F-35 fighter jets is for their conduct in Yemen. Horrific airstrikes against civilians there. But that's not a concern for the U.S. government because the U.S. government was very involved in that. And it just launched its own series of brutal airstrikes in Yemen. So that's obviously not a factor here. But that's something that I would be concerned with. And both of them have a history of arming Al-Qaeda guys in Yemen as well. All right, so the next one, the last story here, first arms sale to Taiwan approved under Trump. So this one's from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. The White House approved a $330 million sale of parts for military aircraft to Taiwan. It is the first time President Donald Trump has signed off on a weapon sale to Taipei since returning to the Oval Office. This is for aircraft parts for the F-16, C-130, and indigenous defense fighter aircraft. And so this is, the U.S. has sold weapons to Taiwan basically, since the normalization deal with China back in, 1979, when they officially ended relations with Taiwan and opened up with China. In recent years, we saw the U.S. start giving military aid to Taiwan. But Kyle actually wrote this up. Apparently, Trump didn't approve a military aid package to them. They wanted Taiwan to pay. And so it's surprising that this is the first deal that we've seen signed off under Trump, because in his last administration, he signed off on a whole bunch of, they pushed forward a whole bunch of sales to Taiwan. Biden pushed forward a whole bunch of sales and started giving them military aid. But it seems like things are cooling down a bit when it comes to Taiwan, just at the moment, because I think the people in the Pentagon realize that using all these resources in other places, they can't seriously challenge China off its coast. So they're trying to cool things down a bit when it comes to, provoking China over Taiwan, like Nancy Pelosi did when she took her little trip there. All right, so that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our viewpoints. One from David Gornatsky, Brittany Pedersen's Blood Money and the Babies of Gaza. One from Ted Snyder, Iran, 3 things the New York Times gets wrong. One from Greg Grandin, Escalating the Escalation, a Murder Incorporated Tale of the Drug Wars. One from Paul R. Pillar, Cheney's Ghost has a playbook for war in Venezuela. And our spotlight is from Haaretz, Israel's violent settlers are neither marginal nor a handful. So please go check all that out. Lots of stuff in the lower part of the page from the weekend and content over in our blog. So just always stuff to read at antiwar.com. But I hope everybody had a good weekend. You could always support the show just by liking, subscribing, commenting, sharing it with your friends. Tell them about antiwar.com. Follow us on social media. I will be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.